Hey everyone, Decius here with another video. Today I'm going to be doing a book review on the A Song of Ice and Fire series, the Feast for Crows book. This is the fourth book in the series by George R. R. Martin, and I decided for this review I kind of want to go a little bit off script, kind of unedited, my raw thoughts on the book itself. I literally finished it about 2 hours ago, so I'm pretty much right off the page, and I wanted to just talk about my raw thoughts about the book. I typed up a little bit of an outline, so I'll kind of try to follow that based on just the characters themselves and kind of their arcs and just rough ideas that I pointed out regarding the book. But coming off of The Storm of Swords, I thought it was such a strong book. It was book three. There was a lot riding on it, especially with the Red Wedding, the Purple Wedding with Joffrey's death, the Mountain and the Viper fight, and all these other fights and just events in between, especially on the wall fighting the wildlings. A lot of big events occurred in that book. And this book is kind of the aftermath of all of those events, more specifically concentrated around the King's Landing area and somewhat like the Vale and the Riverlands. So it's definitely hyper focused on these areas in this book specifically. So going into it, in comparison with the last book, it felt a lot more limited. And I think at first it was a bit jarring because I was kind of just growing used to kind of jumping around the world, going up to the wall, then going to Essos with Daenerys, and then going back to King's Landing. And this book was kind of staying in its lane with the characters it chose to delve on. And with time, I think when I got to around halfway through the book, the book really started to grow on me at that point because I thought it kind of started out a bit slow just because I was still riding the high from a Storm of Swords where just there was so much going on. And I think it made me appreciate this book even more because it felt like it took its time building up the characters and the events, and it really kind of drew me in without me even realizing it, that I was so hooked on this book. And I literally finished it in less than a month because I just couldn't stop reading it. It was just really good for what it was. And I think with that, I want to start with some of the characters that I enjoyed the most. And I think number one, the character, it's got to be Cersei. Just having her as a POV character was super interesting, and it really, whenever her chapters showed up, I knew I had to read it from start to finish because it's just so compelling seeing her psychology and how she views the people around her, especially after the aftermath of Tywin dying. So there was a huge vacuum that was left with the absence of Tywin Lannister. He is basically, or was basically, the mastermind behind all of these big events that were occurring in the previous books, especially the Red Wedding. He is intelligent, strong, very fearful. People respected the man. Like, you got to give him credit for that. And Cersei, she kind of went into this book feeling like she needed to be the one to fill the vacuum of power that Tywin Lannister left. And I think with that, she has a very strong sense of self. She thinks she is on par with the kind of person and ruler Tywin was. Like, it seems like she thinks that if she was a man, which she views as her only crutch is being a woman, but if she was a man, she would be exactly like Tywin Lannister. When we can kind of see that that's just not the case. Like, she's constantly plotting schemes throughout the book, specifically against the Tyrells and Marjorie, and they're all of her schemes are all tainted by her own selfishness and her own fear and paranoia as well. Throughout most of her chapters, the prophecy that she was told by Maggie the Frog or the Magi, like a blood mage or something like that, when she was in the tent as a young girl with her two friends, these kind of omens that Maggie the Frog told her have kind of stuck with her whole life because more than half of the things that Maggie the Frog told her came true. Like Robert, he had 16 sons, but Cersei only had 3. she was going to marry the king, not the prince, which was Robert Baratheon instead of Rhaegar Targaryen, which is kind of revealed to be like just a major disappointment in her life. Like she always wanted to be with Rhaegar Targaryen. And when she talks about him, she really looks up to him and really idolizes Rhaegar Targaryen, mostly on a superficial level. And there was a character, I think Oraine Waters, on the council who she kind of looked at as if like kind of looking like Rhaegar Targaryen, but he didn't match up to like how Cersei viewed him in her mind. And so there's definitely a lot of like interesting components with that as well. A lot of reflection on her past, especially being with Robert and how he was sexually abusive to Cersei and how that kind of left an impact on her. And she kind of develops somewhat of a relationship with a woman named Taena Merryweather, who was originally kind of sided with Marjorie and them, but is kind of spending more time with Cersei and telling Cersei about what Marjorie is up to. So there's kind of like a little bit of scheming there, and they do develop somewhat of an intimate relation. Like they sleep in the same bed together, but also Cersei wanted to like please Taena like sexually, and there's a parallel between how Cersei treats Taena and how Robert treated Cersei, especially having to do with drinking a lot. And so it was kind of sad to see that, to be honest. But yeah, she's definitely like very self-centered and not as smart as she thinks. Her plots are very just superficial and very emotionally driven. Her just trying to get rid of Marjorie, get rid of the Tyrells. It's very much based on just resentment for resentment's sake, and also the paranoia and fear of her being replaced by a more beautiful and young queen, which was one of the parts of the prophecy that Maggie the Frog told Cersei. So a lot of these schemes are just being played by Cersei based on her own blind paranoia of things. And so it just doesn't really make sense, a lot of the actions that she's doing. And we can see that in her head, that what she's doing doesn't really make a lot of sense in alignment with how reality actually is in the political climate of the world, and especially after the events of Tywin's death and all of the Brotherhood Without Banners people killing and the siege on Riverrun and the issues in Dorne. Like, she's not really thinking a lot about these things. She's really just thinking about the surface level, in short proximity, how things are affecting her. And so it's just really, it was so interesting to just read her character there, especially near the end when she got arrested by these sparrows, because she basically gave these sparrows so much power and restored a law that Maegor the Cruel, which was the third Targaryen king, set to get rid of the faith because they were just trying to take control over the Targaryens. And so there was, and I think Jaehaerys the Conciliator, the fourth king after Maegor the Cruel, made a lot more political restrictions to the faith. And Cersei just decided to just go ahead and give the faith all the power again, which was such a stupid move. And it really shot her in the foot by doing that, because now in the last chapter of the book, in her POV, she's literally locked in a cell naked and being forced to confess her own sins about, you know, fucking her brother and her cousin and a Knight of the Kingsguard. Or it might have been, it was Osney Kettleblack that Cersei fucked. And I think he was in the City Guard, not the Kingsguard. Osmond Kettleblack was in the Kingsguard. So yeah, just a little confusion there myself. But yeah, just super fun chapters to read. There's a lot more I could say, but I don't want the video to be too long. I kind of wanted to just be my quick thoughts right after reading the book. Moving on to Jaime, obviously, you know, Cersei's brother, and so two pillars of the POVs were Cersei and Jaime. I think they were kind of the main characters of the book, to be honest, in my point of view. And we just see more and more in Jaime since his own POV introduction in Storm of Swords, where he has just a lot of guilt for, you know, not being as honorable as he'd like, especially, you know, just always being called the Kingslayer his whole life since he killed Aerys Targaryen. And he really wants to try to hold some sort of honor in himself. and that kind of reflects on his pact or his oath to Catelyn Stark to save or try to find her daughters, as well as to not lay arms against House Tully or the Starks. And we definitely see that consistently portrayed throughout the book, especially when he's trying to end the siege on Riverrun and just take over Riverrun, get Brynden, Blackfish Tully out of there, and we see that he really doesn't want to fight those houses in that city or that kingdom, because of his own sense of integrity that he still is trying to cling on to. And I think that kind of makes him more of a sympathetic character. And we also see, in his absence of his sword hand, he still wants to reclaim parts of that identity of being a swordsman. So he practices pretty much every night with Ilyn Payne, he's the King's Justice in King's Landing. He's the one that beheads everyone, and he was kind of given a little bit of character development in this book. I mean, he can't speak, so you can only give so much character development to someone that doesn't actually speak, but there was some nonverbal communication which kind of fleshed the character out, especially when Jaime was going into Sir Ilyn Payne's quarters where he sleeps, which was near the black cell, the dungeon area, and he goes up into his room and there's wine bottles broken all over and nasty clothes. He just lives in filth, and Jaime noted, all this man cares about is killing. And I thought that, it makes Ilyn Payne obviously one-dimensional in that sense. We already viewed him as just a killer, so him kind of living up to that, I think it adds another level of character development to him. And Jaime, when he's practicing with Sir Ilyn Payne, he kind of is able to tell him whatever, tell him about how he bangs his sister and kisses her, and just stories about that stuff, and just being honest about his own problems in life. And I mean, Ilyn Payne's not going to tell anyone what Jaime's saying, so it kind of gives him someone to talk to about this stuff. But it's kind of funny, Sir Ilyn Payne, he'll chuckle, he'll cackle at what it says, he'll laugh at Jaime. And I thought that was kind of an interesting dynamic. And every time he did that, Jaime was really bothered. Ilyn would smile and give a nasty smile to Jaime, and you could tell that kind of got to Jaime. He's definitely vulnerable to other people's opinions, especially the opinions of people that know more about his life than he would really tell anyone else. So I thought that was interesting. There's definitely a lot of vulnerability there in Jaime, and we definitely see that a false sense of pride in himself as well, when he's talking with his aunt, Jenna Lannister. And Jenna is she's the wife of Sir or Lord Emon Frey, who is going to be the Lord of Riverrun. He's a super annoying character, very, very Frey. Just all the Freys seem kind of similar in the sense that they seem to be just cowards and just very slimy, kind of just annoying people that think too much of themselves. And we see that Jenna mentions that Jaime is more similar to his uncle Kevin and a couple of Tywin's brothers than Tywin himself. And she notes that Tyrion is the son of Tywin, and I think that kind of hits Jaime in a spot that he didn't really think of before. You always for Jaime and Cersei alike, they look so much up to Tywin, and kind of hearing that nuanced perspective from another family member about how that's not really the case. They're more like the other Lannisters, and Tyrion is really the one that's closest to Tywin, and that's what Jaime and Cersei want to believe for themselves, and that's what Tyrion really is in reality. I just think that's a really interesting dynamic, kind of the triangle between these three siblings. And the Jaime chapters were always just really interesting to read, and especially when he went to Darry and he talked to Lancel, and Lancel going to the Sparrows because he's super pious now. Just really interesting dynamics, and it really made the story that much more interesting than it already was, especially at the end where he burns Cersei's letter of plea to save her from the sparrows. He tells the maester to throw it in the fire. Like, when I read that, literally I read that this morning, I was like, damn! Like, I read that and I got just a palpable reaction. Like, it just goes to show how much Jaime is changing and actually defying Cersei, which was very refreshing to see as his final chapter in the book. Next, I want to move on to Samwell Tarly's chapters. He is basically on transit for most of the book. He starts off in the Wall, but Jon sends him to Oldtown to become a maester, and so the whole book in his chapters is traveling to Oldtown. So he goes with Maester Aemon, he's 102 years old. He probably ain't gonna make it to Oldtown, let's be honest. He's also with Gilly and a baby, and that baby is revealed to be Mance Rayder's baby, and Gilly's baby was left on the Wall, which is devastating to Gilly throughout a lot of the book. And this was because Stannis and Melisandre are sacrificing people with king's blood to try to gain power from the Lord of Light, and taking Mance Rayder's baby, who has king's blood in a sense, the king beyond the Wall, would kind of hinder Stannis and Melisandre from being able to do that. So it was somewhat of a sacrifice for the greater good in that regard, but it was still pretty fucked up. And they go to Braavos, and they're also with another Knight of the Night's Watch, or person of the Night's Watch, named Darion. And Darion, he turns out to pretty much be a deserter. He just wants to bang chicks in Braavos and sing songs. And there is an interesting dynamic because Arya actually has an interaction with Samwell in Braavos, where Darion is like threatening Samwell, and there's just kind of like a fight brewing in this tavern, and there's also two guys that are trying to fight Samwell. I think that's the main thing that happens, and Arya protects Samwell against these two guys. So there's a really cool interaction there between Samwell and Arya, who, goes by no one. So not really Arya at that point, but she definitely subconsciously has that personal connection to Samwell because she knows that Samwell has some sort of relationship with Jon Snow because he's from the Night's Watch. And I think Samwell also talks about, Lord Snow sent us, so that also gives Arya more of a personal connection to the situation at hand, which bites her in the ass near the end of her story arcs, which I'll talk about later on in the video. But we get more development from Maester Aemon. He is dying. He's kind of losing his wits, and he's talking about the past and his brother. And he's also kind of more knowledgeable about the situation with Daenerys and her dragons now, which gives Maester Aemon sort of a more energy to want to go and find Daenerys and give her counsel. He states that Daenerys needs to have a maester, needs to have a good counsel to get her back to Westeros. And so that's pretty interesting to see, because obviously they are related. Aemon Targaryen is one of the oldest people in Westeros, it's stated at the end of the book, and he's, one of the last Targaryens as well. And there's also some moments with Samwell. He does have sex with Gilly, and he feels immense guilt about oath breaking, which is something that we see throughout the book even more in the Aerion Martell chapters as well. With Sir Aris Oakheart, he feels immense guilt for having sex with Aerion Martell, and I'll go over those things later on. But there's a lot of elements in the book about oath breaking and feeling immense shame, immense guilt, and also a couple of opinions from outside perspectives of how that is kind of perplexing. Samwell is on a boat with Summer Islanders going from Pentos down to through Dorne, the coasts of Dorne, to Oldtown. And the Summer Islanders are so confused, like, why are you so upset, about having sex with Gilly? Especially, this was after Maester Aemon passed away. They look at sex as, just a celebration of life, and they're so confused, why Samwell would be so down on himself and hateful to himself and trying to avoid Gilly after having sex with her. and kind of giving Samuel a different nuanced perspective of kind of just being alive and being a human in the world, and just how Westeros really has so many rigid systems that are upheld and just take people into another realm of suffering from blocking people from what they really want from their own nature. And so Westeros, it's very much depicted as a society built upon people who are blocked off from themselves and very much immersed in the sense of duty and honor. Those are the driving forces of Westeros. And it's always fun to see outsider perspectives bleed into the perspectives of the main POV characters that are completely enmeshed and immersed in the culture of Westeros. So that's always fun to see. It's always fun to see a little bit of world-breaking moments there. And wow, near the end of the series of Samwell's arc throughout the book, he gets to Old Town, and Old Town and the villages around it are being raided and attacked by Greyjoys. So there's a lot of Greyjoy chapters in the book, which I'll talk about later, and it kind of shows the effect of that on the world, and especially with Euron Greyjoy's fleet. And when they get to Old Town, he is going to like the main tower to kind of enroll to become a novice or an acolyte, and just learn from the maesters themselves and let them know about the White Walkers, about the dragons, about Dragonglass, all this stuff. And there's a character who kind of stops him in the lobby and gets the story from him and brings him to another area, kind of like an underground like maester section, like the Archmaester who's not really the Archmaester. And this dude, he has a giant Dragonglass candle that has a giant flame, and it's revealed that these Dragonglass candles, they can kind of see through space. They can see the world around them and communicate with people and embed visions in people. And that's how Valyria used to communicate in the past, like magically. Like they basically had Dragonglass internet. And I thought that was, super cool world building, cool magic world building. And I really thought that was fucking awesome. I know we're not going to really hear much more about that. If Winds of Winter ever does come out, who knows? Or Dream of Spring, probably not. But, that was cool world building, and there's a lot you can do with that kind of fantasy. So I thought Samwell chapters were fine. They were enjoyable to read, and they had a pretty cool ending, so no qualms there. Whew. Next, I want to talk about Brienne. Brienne's chapters, they started off, pretty slow. She's trying to find Sansa, a girl of 3 and 10, my sister. And she meets up with a couple knights, and, she's very paranoid about men in her life, because she talks about her past and how just horribly she was treated for, not being the most physically attractive, and also wanting to be a knight and, wield swords and not do things that contemporary women would want to do in Westeros and be raised to do. And so there's a lot of resentment from the world around her, and that kind of makes her have a very strong shell around her to not really be able to truly let herself be herself. And I think the Brienne chapters really do the best job of showing the state of the world right now, as of A Feast for Crows. I think the title A Feast for Crows is most relevant in the Brienne chapters, because it just really goes to show how broken the world is right now. It really feels like there is an apocalypse. There's empty villages, there's dead bodies, there's hanging bodies, the weather's getting colder, so the leaves are falling, the river's cold, the world just feels very cold. It feels dead. It just feels like just this evil energy is everywhere. And we just really see that the most in the Brienne chapters. I think the further the Brienne chapters progressed, the more I was so immersed in her story arc, and the more it honestly felt like a horror movie. You just the throughout the whole book series with the Brienne chapters, it had this sense of impending doom. And unfortunately, I was spoiled when I was like 12 and I was obsessed with like watching videos about Game of Thrones. I was unfortunately spoiled that Brienne was hung by it, um, or hanged by Lady Stoneheart, but they really didn't stop me from enjoying the moment even more by just seeing the step by steps of how it got to that point. And I just want to say, like, I just said that Brienne was hung by Lady Stoneheart, and I know that's not grammatically correct. It was hanged, and that was like a joke that was actually said in this book. I think at the Daries, where Lady Maria was like correcting Lady Emerai about like saying hanged instead of hung. She's like, tapestries are hung, men are hanged. So it just made me think about that, which I thought was funny. Anyway, we are reintroduced again to Podrick Payne, the Squire of Tyrion, and he becomes Brienne's unofficial squire. And it's always good to see Pod. He's always, every time he talks to Brienne, he says, "Sir, lady, sorry." Like every single time he speaks to Brienne, he says that exact thing, which I thought was really endearing to the character. He's very polite, and he's just a good kid. And we also are reintroduced to the knight Sir Hyle Hunt, who had somewhat of a bad past with Brienne, who kind of embarrassed and humiliated her in the past at Highgarden. And he somewhat redeems himself by kind of just wanting to help out Brienne. But there's definitely a lot of tension between them, and just, especially from Brienne to Sir Hyle. Brienne really she hates the man. Hyle does want to kind of regain her favor, but it never really works out. There's also a character, Septon Maribald, who is barefoot. He said he banged a lot of chicks in the past, and to repent for that, he couldn't wear shoes ever again. He also has a dog named Dog, and I think he was one of the most compelling characters to me in the book as like a side character, because he is so acquainted with the land, especially the Riverlands. He knows every step of where to go because he's literally doesn't wear shoes. He can like just remember where everything is based on how it feels on his feet. And I thought it was just really cool to see someone so acquainted with nature and the land, especially when they came across this house with like three women, and Septon Maribald kind of gave them some food, and it seemed like they already kind of knew each other because he's just gone around Westeros for years in the Riverlands, and I thought he was a really cool character just to kind of be a part of the crew for a little bit there. But they do come across an inn full of children, as well as Gendry, which Brienne kind of mistakes for Renly, which makes sense because they're both Baratheons. And I thought that was cool to see Gendry once again at a forge. He has like long hair now. And yeah, there's just children, and then some outlaws come, and one was Biter. And Brienne's fighting him, and the dude fucking bites her cheek off, just rips it off her face, and he has like filed, sharp teeth, and it's just some scary shit. And then he ends up getting killed at the end, but it was such a cool description because Brienne is kind of out of it at that point. Like, she's beat up, her face is bit off, like, and then she says, and then he had this long, glistening, sharp tongue that was gleaming, like a tongue she'd never seen before. It almost looked like a sword, and it was just such a cool little kind of twist. Like, you could picture this like long serpent-like tongue, and then when she says it almost looked like a sword, then you realize, oh, someone stabbed him in the back or the head from behind. Okay, but it was just really cool how George R. R. Martin put that. And unfortunately, we then show her being captured and having just all of these dreams about Renly, about like Jaime. She's yelling Jaime's name, about the Hound, just about it's just like a horror movie at that point. And she's bound up and taken care of. Like, her wounds are dressed at least by like a young girl, and Then she's brought into a cave, and also Thoros of Myr is there talking to Brienne, kind of introducing Stoneheart and what's kind of going on here. Like, Beric took his life to give Lady Stoneheart, or Catelyn Stark, her life back, and the Brotherhood since then has been super dark and cryptic, and Thoros is kind of lost. He doesn't really recognize the Brotherhood anymore for what it is. It's mostly just a band of outlaws just killing people because this old undead lady's telling them to. And so it's kind of sad in that regard. And Brienne's brought forth to Lady Stoneheart in a cave, and she has like a gray hood and robe, and her face is wound up with like a gray scarf, which just shows like her red eyes. It's just envisioning it is so creepy. And she unwinds her face, and she has like gashes all over her face, like from clawing her face, and her skin is like curdled rotten milk, and there's green and brown, and it's all decaying. She has a giant gash on her neck, like, and you can see like the bones on her face through the gashes, and just the decayed blood, and just like there's a lot you can like a lot of just horrifying ways to picture that. And I think he does a good job at describing how she looks, because that is just a grotesque, monstrous depiction that's like, I think that's just one of the scariest elements in the book. And she, like, literally she talks, but what she does is she has her fingers and she wraps it around her neck, and she like digs her fingers into the gash in order to like cover up her like bronchial tube to like get vibrations out of her mouth. Like, that is just some fucking creepy shit. And the way she talks is like a cold, deathless rattle. Like, that's how she talks. And then there's a guy next to her who hears what she says and then says it to Brienne. So it's kind of like talking to an interpreter almost of this creepy undead woman. And she gives Brienne a choice between killing Jaime Lannister or being hung or hanged. And Brienne, she says, I will not make that choice. And they hang her. And they hang Podrick, they hang Sir Hyle Hunt. Fortunately, they let Septon Maribald go. But someone says that Brienne killed the dog, which I don't think was explicitly shown in the book, but they said she killed the dog, which I don't really buy. And yeah, that's how it ends. And it says she utters one word, and that's how it ends. So, it's not stated that she dies explicitly, but it seems like she's dead, like, unless someone saves her in the last second. But that's not really how these books go, is it? Next, I know the video's getting a bit long, so I want to kind of glance over Sansa and Arya as kind of like a collective. They're both changing their identities from being a Stark to being a different identity. In Sansa's case, it's becoming Elaine, who is the natural-born bastard daughter of Littlefinger. She's in the Eyrie, and she's taking care of Sweet Robin, or Sweet Robert, that's his name. It's Sweet Robin in the show, I think. And the kid's just annoying. Like, he's just, he's a sickly guy. He shakes. And I don't think that's what's annoying about him. I think that's kind of like a sad thing. But just his demeanor and stuff. He just seems like a rude kid. Not really socially aware of things, and just not very compassionate. And I mean, he's just a little kid too. So you got to give him some credit there. But there's just some cool world building in the Vale. Excuse me. And we get to know more about, Peter Baelish and kind of the Vale area. And Peter Baelish, he's just a creepy dude. He just wants to make out with Sansa, and it's just fucking weird and makes me not really like him. And I think Littlefinger is kind of like an interesting foil in a sense to Cersei, because he's making all these like plots and schemes and stuff, but they actually seem to have some sort of ground and good calculations. But I do have the feeling that Littlefinger is a little bit full of himself as well. And I think that's going to be the death of him. I think he thinks he's smarter than he is, similar to how Cersei does. But I think obviously Littlefinger's way more smart than Cersei, but I don't know. I can definitely see something bad going on to him from that. And with Arya, she's in Braavos. As I mentioned earlier, she did have an interaction with Samwell, which was pretty cool. And she's under training with the Faceless Men, working with the Waif to kind of learn Braavosi while the Waif learns like the common Westerosi tongue. And just some cool world building in Braavos, just the canals. There's a chapter where she embodies the character of someone named Cat, where she's selling the mussels, clams, and cockles. And the name of that chapter is Cat of the Canals. And that's one thing I really liked about this book is the name of the chapters sometimes were just really cool. Like, especially the Greyjoy chapters and the Dornish chapters, like Captain of the Guards, the Prophet, just some cool chapter names, which really made the book feel like a very different kind of book than the first three. And near the end, after she kills Darion, she kind of confesses that Arya Stark killed Darion, and then the kindly man who is kind of like the instructor of the Faceless Men at the temple gives her like a sour milk potion, and it turns her blind when she wakes up, and that's how her chapters end. So we see that, in the show obviously as well. So I thought I keep saying area, like the Arya and Sansa chapters were pretty good. I don't think they shined as bright as the other chapters in the books. And I think similarly with the Greyjoy and Martell chapters, those were the chapters I was kind of the least engaged in. And I think there's part of that simply because there's just new characters and, it's just kind of like a different setting. Like, it's not building up from something. It's just kind of trying to build on itself. And so I respect George for wanting to create these new POVs and just these new cultures in the Greyjoys, which I found really interesting, and just how they look at things. And especially with Aeron Greyjoy, or otherwise known as Damphair or the Prophet. He's the brother of Balon Greyjoy and Victarion and Euron, and he's kind of like embodying the god of the drowned gods. He's like channeling his voice, so maybe a bit schizo, but like I think he was a pretty cool character. And we see like Victarion Greyjoy as well. He is Balon's oldest brother, and he wants to take the Sea Stone chair for himself, and he does not want Euron to win. And he's very, very gruff, very proud. I guess he killed his wife because his wife must have had sex with Euron, or at least Euron said that. So there's definitely like some guilt in Victarion for doing that, but it also shows that he's a very, very not a good dude. Very, very much a troubled man, which is easy to become in this world in Westeros. And we see Euron Greyjoy as well, the Crow's Eye, super fun character. He has a Valyrian horn, which he states can bend the dragons to his will. And the way it was described was super cool. It had like silver Valyrian runes like written on it, and when one of the dudes like was blowing the horn, the runes glue with fire, and the guy who blew the horn literally died because his lungs were turned into charcoal pretty much. So there's definitely something going on in that horn, some magical property that seems compelling. Like, I don't think he's bluffing there. The horn itself was like 10 feet long, so yeah, I think Daenerys definitely has some competition coming her way. And Euron, in the end, commands Victarion Greyjoy to go to Essos and bring Daenerys to Euron to marry him. But Victarion, he says to himself that he wants to marry Daenerys. So some interesting elements there. I wonder if that will be developed in A Dance with Dragons, or maybe the later books, which won't ever come out. So hopefully there's something else there, maybe in the next book. Then we also see Arianne Martell, who is the daughter of Prince Doran Martell, who is Oberyn's brother. And she's an interesting character. She has a relationship with one of the Kingsguard that is protecting Marcella, Eris Oakheart, and that's kind of how she's introduced through the POV of Eris Oakheart. And yeah, I thought she was an interesting character. I think she was similar to Cersei, where she was making plans to make Marcella the queen, to have Dorne kind of contest the crown against King's Landing. I thought that was somewhat of a dumb plan, and I think Arianne thinks more of herself. Like, she thinks she's really smart when really she seems like a very immature person, to be honest, who's impulsive and just wants to have like to make action because she resents her father for not acting and being too kind and not doing enough. And so I think that rubber bands against Arianne to want to do the opposite of that, and in the process I think that makes her actions more impulsive, not well thought out, and kind of her own demise. She's good at creating her own demise. We see that when she's locked in the tower for trying to harbor Marcella to become the queen. And Marcella's also like brutally injured, it seems like. Darkstar, which is he's a knight of the Dane household, which had the Sword of the Morning guy from Robert's Rebellion, and he literally sliced Marcella's cheek off and her ear off. So yeah, pretty messed up, and kind of a messed up parallelism between Brienne, who gets her cheek bit off. So, I mean, Marcella's not really shown since that reveal, but she seems to be in like some sort of critical condition, and I'm sure Cersei won't be pleased when she hears about that. But she definitely has her own fish to fry, being held captive by the Sparrows. And all in all, I mean, that's the majority of the characters. Asha Greyjoy as well. I think she was very witty, very fun character to follow, and she had some good dialogue, and she stands her ground against like the very brute masculine culture of the Iron Men, and so I thought her character was pretty fun to read as well. But those were the main characters in this book, and I mean, it's one of the shorter books in the series. It's like 684 pages, which, I mean, not a short book by any means, but compared to Storm of Swords, which was over 900, and Dance with Dragons, which is over 900 as well. Definitely one of the shorter books. And so it was a quick read, and it was a fun read. And if you read the book, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it in the comments, or if you agree or disagree with any of my takes. I know my takes were mostly like in the realm of just occurrences in the plot. But I thought the book was fun to read. I thought it had a slower start than maybe Storm for Swords. But I thought as the book progressed, especially the second half, it became just a super fun, engaging read. And I appreciate that in a book when kind of the characters start out a bit slower and build up to just insane climax. And I think that was most seen in the Brienne chapters. So yeah, if I were to give this book a rating out of like 5, I'd give it like I'd give it a 5 just because it's such a good book. Like, I don't really have any qualms with it. I just wanted to make my video. I just finished reading it, so I figured I'd make a video talking about it while my thoughts about it are fresh and straight off the page. So if you're still watching to this point, I mean, you're freaking awesome. If you're here, comment damp hair in the comments. I don't know, just some random phrase from the book. And yeah, if you like just book reviews or talking about A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm definitely going to be making more videos about this series on this channel, so feel free to subscribe to the channel. We're right at pretty much 1,000 subscribers, which is awesome. And if you like the video, hit the like. If you didn't like it, hit the dislike. Anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.